Montana Territory, 1875. The endless sky stretched above the dusty outpost of Silver Creek, a place where the land was as unforgiving as it was beautiful. Rifle shots echoed through the valley as two men squared off at opposite ends of the main street, their shadows stretching long in the late afternoon sun. 22-year-old Rebecca Jenkins stood frozen on the boardwalk, her heart pounding beneath her pale blue calico dress, golden curls catching the light as she watched the confrontation with horror. "This doesn't need to end in blood," called Isaac Norton, his voice steady despite the tension crackling between him and his rival. Rebecca had never intended to be the cause of such strife. She'd come west on her own after losing her parents to influenza back in Philadelphia, determined to make a new life teaching in this frontier town. But frontier life had taught her quickly that a young woman alone became a target for attention, both wanted and unwanted. Isaac believed the West was no place for gentleness. "Out here, a man survives by strength alone," he'd told her once during a quiet moment. At 26, he'd already seen enough violence to harden his edges, though his eyes still held warmth when they fell on her. His hands, calloused from ranch work, always softened when he helped her down from a wagon or guided her across a muddy street. But he kept his heart distant, convinced that to survive the frontier meant keeping emotions buried deep. What Isaac truly wanted was to build his ranch into something that would outlast him, a legacy carved from this wild country. What he needed, though Rebecca sensed he wouldn't admit it, was someone to share that dream with, someone to transform that lonely homestead into a home. The second man, Wade Thornton, stood with his hand hovering near his holster, his face twisted in anger. "She ain't yours to claim, Norton. I saw her first." He was older, rougher, with a reputation for quick fists and quicker temper. Rebecca had never encouraged either man, but in a territory where women were scarce, her mere presence had become cause for rivalry. She'd noticed Isaac weeks earlier, not for any bold gestures, but for his quiet competence. The way he calmed spooked horses with nothing more than soft words, how he seemed to listen when others simply waited for their turn to speak. The standoff continued until Sheriff Miller finally intervened, forcing both men to stand down. As the crowd dispersed, Rebecca felt a hand lightly touch her elbow. "Miss Jenkins," Isaac said softly, "may I walk you back to the schoolhouse? These streets aren't safe right now." Looking into his earnest eyes, Rebecca nodded. This moment, his gentle approach in the aftermath of nearly deadly conflict, changed everything. It was the day Rebecca realized there existed a different kind of strength than what she'd come to expect on the frontier. As they walked, Isaac kept a respectful distance. "I apologize for what happened. That's not how I intended to." He stopped, seemingly embarrassed. "Not how you intended to what, Mr. Norton?" Rebecca asked, her heart quickening. "To court a lady," he finished, his voice barely audible above the creak of wagon wheels passing by. "I've been meaning to ask permission to call on you properly." Rebecca found herself smiling despite the tension of the afternoon. "I believe I would welcome that." What began as a proper courtship soon blossomed into something deeper. Isaac rode into town twice weekly, bringing small treasures that showed his thoughtfulness, wildflowers he'd spotted on his ride, a book from the territorial capital he'd traveled 3 days to find after she'd mentioned an author she enjoyed, fresh eggs from his hens when supplies ran low at her boarding house. As summer stretched into fall, Rebecca discovered the complexity behind Isaac's quiet demeanor. Born to immigrant parents who'd died crossing the plains, he'd been raised by a series of ranch hands and trail bosses who taught him to ride and rope, but little about expressing feelings. While other men boasted in the saloon about their exploits, Isaac built his reputation through reliability and his unwavering word. Their courting faced obstacles beyond Wade Thornton's jealousy. A drought threatened the region, making cattle ranching precarious. Rebecca's position as schoolteacher came under scrutiny from town matrons who questioned whether her friendship with the young rancher was appropriate for someone educating their children. Through it all, Isaac never raised his voice, not when cattle raiders struck his northern pasture, not when Wade Thornton spread rumors about his parentage in the saloon, not even when Rebecca herself tested his patience with her independent streak. "How do you remain so calm?" she asked one evening as they sat on the schoolhouse steps, watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. "My first boss beat a ranch hand half to death for dropping a bridle." Isaac said after a long silence. Afterward, he told me that a man who can't control his temper can't control anything. I decided then I'd never become that kind of man. He looked at his hands. Besides, shouting doesn't solve problems. It just makes people stop listening. As October painted the cottonwoods gold, catastrophe struck. A lightning storm ignited the drought-parched grasslands, sending a wall of fire towards Silver Creek. The town mobilized, with men forming bucket brigades while women gathered children and valuables. Rebecca refused evacuation, instead helping organize the school children's retreat to safety. As smoke darkened the sky, Wade Thornton appeared at the schoolhouse, mounted on a lathered horse. "Time to go, Miss Jenkins," he announced loudly. "I've come to save you." "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Thornton," she replied firmly, "but I still have children unaccounted for." His face darkened. "Don't be foolish, woman. That fire will be here within the hour." He dismounted, reaching for her arm. She said no. Isaac appeared in the doorway, face smudged with soot, voice quiet but resolute. "Rebecca, the Johnson twins are hiding in the church basement. Everyone else is accounted for." Wade stepped between them. "Always playing the hero, Norton. But where were you when raiders hit her boarding house last month? Tending your precious cattle while I was protecting the town." Isaac didn't rise to the bait. "We all do what we can, Thornton. Right now, we need to find those children." The confrontation ended abruptly when the church bell began tolling in alarm. The fire had jumped the creek sooner than expected. Both men joined the evacuation efforts, but it was Isaac who found the missing twins and carried them to safety when smoke overwhelmed them. The town survived, though several outlying buildings, including Rebecca's boarding house, were reduced to ash. Without hesitation, Isaac offered her the cabin he'd built for his ranch foreman who had yet to arrive from Colorado. "It would be improper," Rebecca protested weakly, though she had nowhere else to go. "Mrs. Peterson from the Mercantile has agreed to stay with you as chaperone." Isaac countered with a hint of a smile. "I'll bunk with my hands until we sort this out." This unexpected living arrangement transformed their relationship. Rebecca saw firsthand the life Isaac had built, the neat corrals, the orchard he'd started, the men who respected him not from fear, but from loyalty earned through fair treatment. During these weeks at the ranch, Rebecca discovered something that shifted her understanding of frontier life. Watching Isaac lead his men, not through intimidation but calm competence, she realized that her own preconceptions about Western men had been narrow. The true test of character wasn't how loudly one could command, but how deeply one could inspire through consistent actions. As November winds turned bitter, Isaac and Rebecca sat beside the hearth in his modest ranch house after dinner with the hands. Mrs. Peterson dozed in the corner, her knitting forgotten in her lap. "I received a letter today," Rebecca said softly. "The school board in Denver has offered me a position. Better pay, a real school building with glass windows." Something flickered in Isaac's eyes, but his voice remained steady. "That sounds like a fine opportunity. Denver's becoming quite civilized, I hear." "Yes," she agreed, studying his face. "Although I find I've grown rather fond of our little frontier outpost." "Have you?" he asked, his gaze fixed on the flames. "I have," she confirmed, "particularly certain aspects of it." The moment hung between them, full of possibility, until a pounding at the door shattered their privacy. One of the ranch hands burst in, breathless with urgency. "Boss, riders coming. Looks like Thornton and some men from town." Isaac rose immediately. "Stay inside," he told Rebecca, reaching for his coat. Ignoring his instruction, she followed him onto the porch where 6 mounted men approached, Wade Thornton at their lead. Their expressions ranged from grim to embarrassed. "Evening, Norton," called Wade, his breath clouding in the cold night air. "We've come for Miss Jenkins." Isaac's posture stiffened, but his voice remained level. "What's this about, Thornton? Town council meeting today? Some folks are concerned about the propriety of our schoolteacher living out here, even with a chaperone." Wade's smirk suggested he'd helped foster those concerns. "They've sent us to escort her back to town, to the preacher's house, until more suitable arrangements can be made." Rebecca stepped forward. "This is absurd. I'm a grown woman perfectly capable of—" "It's not about you, Miss Jenkins," interrupted one of the other riders, the Mercantile owner. "It's about the example for the children. You understand." Isaac's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Hoofbeats announced another arrival. Sheriff Miller rode into the yard, looking displeased. "What's this gathering about?" he demanded. Wade explained the council's decision while Rebecca fumed silently. The sheriff looked between Wade and Isaac, clearly assessing the tension. "Well now, there's a simple solution here," the sheriff said finally. "One that preserves the lady's reputation and settles this matter permanently." "What's that?" asked Isaac, speaking for the first time since the sheriff's arrival. The older man fixed him with a pointed stare. "Seems to me if there's to be no impropriety, the lady needs a husband, not a chaperone." A heavy silence fell over the yard. Rebecca felt her cheeks burn despite the cold. She looked at Isaac, whose expression had gone unreadable. "That's between Miss Jenkins and me," Isaac said quietly. "Not a matter for committee vote." Wade snorted. "You've had months to speak up, Norton. Maybe the lady needs a man who knows his mind." He dismounted, approaching Rebecca. "Miss Jenkins, I'm offering you a proper home in town, respectability, and a husband who can protect you. What do you say to that?" Before Rebecca could answer, Isaac stepped between them. "Wade, I've respected your interest in Miss Jenkins, but I won't have her pressured this way." "Still hiding behind good manners?" Wade taunted. "Maybe it's time we settled this like real men." His hand moved toward his holster. "No." Rebecca's voice cut through the tension. "I will not be won like some prize at the county fair." The sheriff moved his horse forward. "That's enough, Thornton. Mount up." Wade hesitated, his pride visibly warring with his sense of self-preservation. Finally, he climbed back into the saddle, but not before issuing a parting shot. "This isn't finished, Norton. A woman needs a real man, not some soft-spoken coward." After the riders departed, the sheriff tipped his hat to Rebecca. "Miss Jenkins, I apologize for the disturbance, but you should know the council's concerns are real. Your position may be in jeopardy." After he rode away, Rebecca and Isaac stood in silence on the porch, their breath mingling in the cold air between them. "I'm sorry," Isaac finally said. "I never meant to compromise your standing in the community." Rebecca studied him in the lamplight spilling from the house. "Do you know what I realized today, Isaac? I've spent my life believing that strength shows itself in moments of confrontation. But real strength is what you demonstrated. The courage to refuse provocation, to stand firm without resorting to threats." She stepped closer. "Wade wants to fight for me. But you want to live for me, don't you?" The transformation in his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Rebecca, I've loved you since the moment you stood up at that first town meeting and demanded books for the school. I just never thought I had the right to say so. Why not? Look around." He gestured to the modest ranch. "I can't offer you the comforts you deserve. No fancy house in Denver. No." She silenced him by taking his hand. "What I deserve is a man who treats me as an equal, who listens when I speak, who shows his strength through kindness rather than domination." Her voice softened. "I believe I've found him, if he'll have me." In that moment, beneath the vast Montana sky scattered with stars, Isaac Norton found the courage that had eluded him. He knelt in the dirt of the home he'd built with his own hands and asked Rebecca Jenkins to share his life. Their wedding in December transformed the small Silver Creek church. Townspeople who had whispered about impropriety now celebrated the union of their schoolteacher to the respected young rancher. Even Wade Thornton eventually offered grudging congratulations, though he left town shortly after for the gold fields in Dakota Territory. Spring found Rebecca and Isaac expanding both house and school. With her encouragement, Isaac opened his ranch for community gatherings, slowly breaking down his tendency toward isolation. Rebecca continued teaching, riding to and from town with Isaac when weather permitted, establishing a lending library in their home for neighboring ranchers. One evening, a year after the fire that had first brought them under the same roof, they sat on their newly built porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. "Do you ever regret it?" Isaac asked, his fingers intertwined with hers. "Choosing this life over Denver?" Rebecca smiled, placing her free hand over her slightly rounded belly, a secret they were waiting another month to share with the community. "Never. I thought I came west to find independence, but what I really found was something rarer, a partnership of equals." As darkness settled over the land they both loved, Rebecca reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had come to the territory believing frontier life required hardness, only to discover that true strength often whispered rather than shouted. In Isaac's quiet steadiness, she had found not just a husband, but a vision of what the West could become. Not just a wild land to be conquered, but a place where new kinds of families and communities could grow. The ranch that once stood as a solitary outpost now welcomed neighboring families for Sunday dinners, hosted reading circles where ranch hands improved their literacy alongside town children, and served as a waypoint for travelers who spread word of the Norton homestead as a place of uncommon welcome. "You know," Isaac murmured, his arm around her shoulders as the first stars appeared. "They're saying Silver Creek might become a proper town soon. Railroad's considering a spur line." "More children for the school," Rebecca replied, leaning into his embrace. "More chances to build the community we want to live in." As night deepened over the Montana territory, Rebecca thought about the crossroads that had defined her life. Coming west alone, standing her ground during the fire, choosing Isaac over Wade and his flashier displays of frontier masculinity. Each choice had taught her something about herself and about love. She had chosen the man who never raised his voice, and in doing so, had found a life where her own voice could be clearly heard. Together, they were writing a new story of what the frontier could be, not just a place of survival, but one where love could truly flourish.